All right. So, let me try this live thing real quick and see what is going on. Okay, I can request somebody. Go live with. Oh, here we go. Where'd you go? What? I just seen you just now. Wait, too many people are going live. I can't find you. Ah, here we go. You requested it. I'm glad. I hope this works out.
I requested
Oh,
you.
assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Okay, so this looks like it's working out, and I think we
Okay.
can just keep it like this anyways because we're a few minutes early and there seems to be a good
Okay.
amount of people.
I don't have a phone since, so I'm gonna try to find a stable way of getting this phone
You
just
know,
set up.
you know what works?
What's up?
I usually use my laptop and I let my phone just
All
lean
right,
back
bet. I'll
against my
try that.
laptop. To
I'll
open up
try
the
that. Hold
laptop,
on. Yeah, I'll grab it.
yeah, it
I'm
works.
actually in front of my desktop, but give me.
Sure. Yeah, take your time to get set up.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah, take your time. So everyone who's joining, assalamu alaikum and welcome. I am here with brother Bilal, and today we are going to talk about anti-Black racism in the Muslim community. Since there's a good amount of people already, I'm wondering if you guys can kind of just let me know if you can hear us well, if there's an echo. Um, yeah, let us know what we can adjust on our end. So just give us a little heads up on what we need to do, please. So yeah, again, please type in the box if you can hear us well. If there's an echo, oh, there's an echo. So does anybody know how do we deal with echoes? Is it who's echoing? Butch, can you say it? Talk to us a little bit just so we can see.
Sure. Yeah. Microphone check 1 2. What is this?
Okay, good. Let's see. Oh, it seems like okay, it seems better now. Loud and clear. There's a bit of an
Now,
echo.
some people say there's an echo and others don't.
Okay, so we're just gonna have to say Bismillah and pray that the
One of
echo.
one of us, somebody's recommended that one of us put on headphones. I don't have headphones handy. I don't know if you do.
I do. Give me a second. Hold on.
Why don't we try that? Yeah.
Yeah, let me try that. You guys can tell me. Where are these headphones? I never knew any. Okay, let's try this. Bismillah.
All right. And someone else told me to just turn down the volume on my phone to hopefully help with the echo. Um,
It's you, Wafa, with the echo. Oh, stop it, guys. Come on, give me a chance. Is this better now? You guys can let me know. I feel like I'm not hearing my echo. I was kind of hearing it earlier.
yeah,
So
I
let's
heard it a
see.
little bit before. I'm not hearing anything now. But what about me? How do I sound?
All right, somebody tell us how we sound. Okay, they're saying perfect. Alhamdulillah.
Wa shukri lillah.
Ah, yes. Okay, good. So, I'm thinking here's what we can do. For the next 5 minutes, maybe we kind of give people a little bit of time to join the chat and join the live, and then we can get into all kinds of things. If you guys have any questions, I would ask you to hold them for now because I don't want them to disappear in the chat. Um, then you guys can go nuts with the questions, inshallah, and then we'll be able to really address everything. So, yeah, so I'm thinking, Brother Bilal, I came across your Instagram through Mustafa Briggs. And
Sure.
yeah, Mustafa came to Jamaica on one of my retreats, and we had a whole theme. And the theme of the retreat was to discuss the history of Islam in Jamaica.
Mm,
So, yeah, Alhamdulillah, that's what happened. And then I saw him through your profile. I think he was doing a tour in the States and he
yep.
tagged
Yep.
you. And then I was just very intrigued by your profile. So I'm thinking maybe you can kind of start with a little bit of background, who you are, where you're from, why you are where you are today, what your passions are, and then we can just delve straight into everything else.
I mean, sure. So I teach African history and the history of Islam at UC Santa Barbara. So I'm out here in Cali now. I taught at the University of Michigan for 10 years. And I'll just give a shout right now to all my folks back in the 313. Um, Originally from DC, went to junior high and high school in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which has obviously been in the news recently. I'm assuming we'll talk about that a little bit too.
Mhm.
Um, and let's see, as with respect to my background, I mean, I suppose I'm as American as it gets. You know, both my parents are from DC originally. Um, I came to Islam when I was 15 years old.
Oh,
Um,
mashallah, young thing.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And I've talked about that like in other venues, like, you know, talked about my conversion experience. There's YouTube talks available about that. But I would say, like, you know, just to kind of focus on, you know, like my work and what I do, it's mainly really kind of rooted in bringing people's attention to like the beauty and the jewels of the West African Islamic tradition, both from a kind of historical and sociological standpoint, but also from an ethical and spiritual standpoint, like to gain the benefit of like learning from African peoples, both historically and spiritually.
That's beautiful. There's very little that we know about African scholarship, West African scholarship, especially when it comes to Islam. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really, that's, I know you're talking to me, but you spent some time in Senegal, um, where you studied. It's a little bit off topic, but what do you feel are some things that no one knows about West African scholarship when it comes to Islam?
Yeah, there's any number of things that could be said about that, but in response, what I'll just say is that the analytical disciplines of the Islamic religious sciences and the spiritual disciplines of the Islamic religious sciences are inseparable in West Africa.
Mm.
There's no divorce between the study of law and the study of Sufism. There's no divorce between the study of between spiritual seeking and striving and the disciplined academic study of Tawheed. That's is very integrated there. And then beyond that, that's like at a kind of scholarly level. At a kind of more practical level, if you want to see um, a living example of a healthy, organic expression of Islam in people's ordinary day-to-day lives,
Hmm.
go to Senegal,
Oh, for real.
because it's a place that does so much more to preserve the fitra of a human being, the innate, natural, sound disposition of a human being, than any society that I've interacted with. That's
Wow.
maybe what I say.
Okay, that's a big one. Mashallah. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Hmm.
SubhanAllah. So, moving on to really, I would say, the topic of the day. I wanted to have a live because I didn't want to just have a conversation. Okay, how do we tackle anti-Black racism in the Muslim community? What does that, there's a bunch of questions I have in mind right now, and feel free, we can just go with the flow and I'll open up questions in a few minutes. But I was thinking a bunch of things. What does anti-Black racism look like in the Muslim community? Where is it from? What's its history? What is anti-Black racism when it comes to Arabs versus Pakistanis and Southeast Asians? Is it a different type of racism? Really, what I'm interested in is the root of it all, and what are practical things that we can start doing every day, um, even like if it means, starting conferences, a yearly conference, just like we have Reviving the Islamic Spirit conference, an actual, what, we don't need to call it an anti-Black racism conference, but be very clear that these conferences are going to be about these subjects. So, the theory, the history, but how do we really deal with this with our parents, with our aunties, with our imams, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. It's an excellent set of questions that you've posed. I'm going to return to the first one. The very first thing that you said was, what does it look like? Um, and that's an easy place for me to start, because I told you that I came into Islam when I was 15 years old. But by the time I was 19, I was, all but not practicing, because the racism that I had experienced within the American Muslim community was more pronounced, vicious, and damaging than the racism that I had experienced growing up in a white supremacist society.
Whoa.
And it was a bitter disappointment, as a Black man who reached Islam through the autobiography of Malcolm X and heard the call that he made at the end of that book for an Islam that didn't see color and that was capable of transcending it, and to find out how untrue that was in an American context in the late 1980s. I was treated with more condescension, more outright, kind of dismissal than I had experienced, in a deeply racist society. And I say that when I say that, like that means something, because I was stopped by the police 17 times for driving while black in the city of Minneapolis, just during the 17th year of my life, just in the year between my 16th and 17th birthdays. Like, I experienced my fair share of racism. My father, was beaten, to within an inch of his life 3 separate times by DC police. Like, I knew what racism was. But I never saw people who were so kind of plainly dismissive of Black people getting treated as junior, insignificant members of a religious community. If your Arabic pronunciation wasn't a certain way, you were treated a certain way. And there was just a kind of general prevailing assumption amongst non-Black Muslims that real Muslims were Arab or South Asian, and that I'll leave it at that. So that's what it looked like, and I don't know how much it's changed. In the late 90s, a relative of mine who was not Muslim, but who was going through some things in his life and had decided to accept Islam, walked into a predominantly Desi mosque in a town in Illinois, to make his shahada. And he was stopped at the door. The Black dude stopped at the door and told, "We think you might be in the wrong place."
Wow,
I've had Arabs hit my arms during prayer to try to get me to fold my arms across my chest, because I pray with sadl instead of qabd. And they've spoken to me as though, after the fact, as though I obviously don't know what I'm doing, and that I should listen to them. And then when I explain Imam Malik's position and transmission of hadith, for both positions, and the basis for sadl in the established practice of the people of Medina, they look at me like I have four heads coming out the side of my neck, because they don't know anything about fiqh. They don't know anything about Imam, but they assume that because I'm Black, I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Wow. So this is like, it's funny. I mean, just being born.
Ask any Black. Sorry to interrupt, but
go
ask
ahead.
any Black person can multiply the stories about them being treated as though the assumption is that they're ignorant.
Wow, that they don't know Islam. Aside from the fact that they have all these stereotypes about Black folks to begin with, the layer that comes with being a Muslim is you don't understand Islam, you don't understand the Sharia, you don't understand how to pray.
As though Islam is in some way the property and proper expression of Arabs.
So there's a monopoly over the deen.
Mm.
But it's funny, I guess with a white convert, you would never see that, because I feel that, I mean, people often mistake me as a convert, which is quite funny, because the privilege that I get from like looking like a convert and then them finding out I'm just born Muslim. So it's like they look at me like, oh, better. That I had a call and it was interrupted. So there's
okay, good. I was wondering if it was on my end. Okay,
no,
good.
it might happen. So I'll just probably just quit the call. But it's funny. I was saying that being born a Muslim, when they find out that you're born Muslim, all of a sudden they lose interest. You're still up there in the hierarchy, but you're not quite up there where you're a convert. But I feel if you're a white convert, they'll be very gentle in the ways in which nobody's going to slap your hand. They're going to take your hands, invite you over.
There was a sister there's a South Asian sister, and I wish that I had paid closer attention, because I read this probably 10 years ago, and so I didn't catch the sister's name, and I can't now find the post. But it was a sister that said, and a South Asian sister, to her credit, that said this. She said, everything that you need to know about the race and gender dynamics within the American Muslim community can be summarized as follows: if a white male accepts Islam, give him 6 months, he'll be leading prayers in the mosque. If a black woman accepts Islam, give her 6 years and she'll still be watching kids in the daycare while everybody else prays.
SubhanAllah. That can't be. There's nothing more accurate than that. I agree with you. There's
Yeah.
nothing more. So this sentiment in the Muslim community, whether it's Arab, Desi, you name it. What do we trace it back to? Do we trace it back to colonialism? Do we trace it back to what, where does it all come from?
Yeah, a lot of people kind of falsely attribute a lot of racial stereotyping to the original documentary text and to the time of the prophet, and they'll peace be upon him, and they'll take out of context, references to things like Bilal's skin color and the skin color of other people, to just imagine that this is like an unchanged dynamic, that black people have always been kind of looked down upon by Arabs at some level, or have always been sort of junior partners. In truth, nothing could be further from the truth. There was a great deal of tribalism, competition for priority, praise of ancestors, asabiya, that was inherent in the time of Jahiliyyah. And it was one of the things that the Prophet, peace be upon him, worked very, very hard to try to exterminate. But none of that was the kind of anti-black racism that we experience today. The anti-black racism that we experience today, and I've written about this actually in the Cambridge World History of Slavery, Volume 3, in a piece called Slavery in Islamic Africa. The modern anti-black racism is tied to the history of the transatlantic slave trade, and the fact that it ends up also producing a concomitant Arab-operated slave trade in the Indian Ocean that leads to very, very high levels of enslavement of black people in lots of Muslim societies only at the end of the 18th century and through the 19th century. So the most recent kind of history of enslavement in all of those societies oftentimes has black people as its targets, whereas previously black people were a minority amongst the enslaved community in all of those places. Okay. But people only remember the last thing that they see, right? When we think about slavery in this country, we think about cotton plantations, slave breeding, and being sold down the river. None of those things existed before the 19th century. Cotton wasn't even domesticated systematically until the 1800s because it took the cotton gin to process it. There is no being sold down the river because in 1807, the international slave trade is abolished. And only after fresh imports of slaves from Africa are prohibited does it become logical to move slaves from old South colonies like Virginia to deep South colonies like Mississippi. Before that, you would have just brought slaves straight to Mississippi, right? So that whole being sold down the river, that's a 19th century thing. Similarly, slave breeding, right? The idea that slaves were put together to make more slaves through natural reproduction. There's never been a place in human history where slaves have reproduced through natural reproduction until the 19th century, because slavery is built on an economy of theft by itself. It requires working people to death and not letting them reproduce as a species. It only became a thing after fresh imports from Africa were prohibited. So everything that we think that we know about slavery in its historical context in America is just an artifact of the 19th century. And you can say the same about racial dynamics in other parts of the Muslim world. Slavery increases in intensity from the Sudan to Egypt in the 19th century. It becomes important on the Arabian Peninsula, in Iran, from the East African coast in the 19th century. And those societies become, in basic ways, deeply racist societies. Then European imperialism imposes a kind of white supremacist framework for understanding civilizational hierarchies on every Muslim society. And that gets overlaid on recent experiences of slavery. So now black folks are really at the bottom of the hierarchy. Then, and I'll end here, but so to let you ask another question, then in all of these different parts of the Arab world or Muslim world that people migrate to North America from, you've got racism, double level, slavery and imperialism, right? And then they come to America, the belly of the beast. where every immigrant community has had to distinguish itself from the subjugated Black community by stepping on the head of the subjugated Black community in order to climb to a higher rung in the racial ladder.
Wow. So, wow. So basically, what we need to rewrite history. How do you even change people's perspectives on history when it's so like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a history teacher,
Yeah.
right? And oftentimes when I would teach history, I would often start with an African proverb that would say, you know, until lions learn to speak, tales of the hunt will only glorify the hunter and always glorify the hunter. So whatever's in history books, you can deduct what's not in it by just looking what's there and figuring out what's missing. So in regards now to say Desi racism, their sentiments of anti-Black, would you say they're very similar to the ones that Arabs have, or are they, how do they differ? Because I mean, we can get into a lot of my East African friends. Actually, one of my East African friends was telling me, please do mention East African racism towards West Africans and Black Americans, particularly in Caribbean, people of Caribbean origins. I think that's another important thing to highlight.
Yeah. So there's a few.
Hello, sorry. I think I
That's
froze
okay.
for a second. I think
Yeah, you froze
yeah,
for a
go ahead.
second.
Cool. The last thing you said were there's a few, and then it cut off for me.
Okay. So there were a few questions. The first one that you asked is what you asked actually specifically, what do I do? So I'll answer that part first, and then I'll get to the part about distinguishing between different kinds of racism. So most of what I do is actually designed to inform people about the fact that Black people have actually never been marginal to the history of Islam. That in the first instance, and this is where I refer folks to my brilliant colleague Imam Dawood Walid and his books on Blackness and Arabness in early Islam, is that many of the Arabs were people that we would describe today as Black people. They are described with color terminology, asmar shadidul asmara, right, which is the chocolate brown, intensely brown in color. That's the color terminology that's used to describe Bilal. But it's also the color terminology that's used to describe Ali.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, in
Interesting.
authentic hadith,
Wow.
right? It's the same color terminology that's used to describe Musa, alayhi salatu wasalam. When the prophet has visions of him in dreams and waking states, he said that he was dark brown in color with kinky hair. So a lot of the work actually has to do with reminding people that Black people are hiding in Islamic history in plain sight. Like, you imagine that the Quran is a book that's largely about Arabs because it's in Arabic, but a full 2/3 of the stories, the Qisas al-Anbiya that occur in the Quran, are taking place either in Africa or with African main characters. Most of it takes place in ancient Egypt. And as a historian of ancient Africa, it's unambiguous that the population of ancient Egypt in the times mentioned by the Quran is jet black in color.
Absolutely.
So Moses could never have been living in Pharaoh's household except as a Black person. So the reason why we don't pay attention to that is not just to do with Arab chauvinism and Arabic linguistic chauvinism with respect to the Quran. We forget that most of the Quran takes place in Africa, but it's also because the Quran doesn't signal the color of its characters. God does not mention skin color or hair texture in any ayah of the Quran with reference to its main characters, because God doesn't see skin color and hair texture. God sees hearts and deeds. The only partial exception to that rule is the name Adam, which means dark brown in Old Arabic.
Right. I don't know if I was talking to you. You mentioned that in one of my messages. Somebody was talking about that. That was the first one. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I talked about it in a talk that I gave, facebook.com/we are Wasit, which you can still find. Now, with respect to the other question, because so bringing the story of Black people, whether in West Africa, whether in the time of the prophet, whether in the Quran itself, back into the story is an important part of the anti-racist education. But it doesn't, information by itself does not fix sicknesses of the heart.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Information does not by itself fix sicknesses of the heart. And the subject of my talk the other night was understanding what racism actually is, which it's a satanic attack on the entire species of humanity. Because the first racist from the standpoint of the Quran is Iblis himself. When he's commanded to bow to the frame of that black ancestor, that Adam, he refuses. He says, I'm better than him. You made me from fire, you made him from clay. So on the basis of his bodily composition and his origin, he claims superiority over our entire species. And his game ever since has been to get us to see one another with the same kind of contempt that he has for all of us.
Wow. Wow. Subhanallah.
Satanism, the real Satanism, is not about, six-pointed, stars or, goat heads. No, the real Satanism is racism, and its most perfect historical expression is white supremacy.
Wow, subhanallah.
You don't need to look no further than that to find the devil.
Wow, you see that right there? What you're touching on right now, I think, is a perfect beginning to opening up someone's heart to checking themselves and figuring out their intentions. Because everyone will say, yes, racism is bad. We've been posting and we've been sharing and we've been changing our photos to different colors. It's a black photo and so on and so forth. But how much of it, I wonder, is just show off activism? How much of it is just done so that people are still your friends, people can still think you're conscious, people are still on your side? But that right there, what you touch on just really talking about how satanic racism is, it's my first time ever hearing something like this. I'm gonna have to just be blunt with you. This is my first time ever thinking of racism like that. I mean, I always knew it was horrible. I understood that it was a spiritual disease, but how you broke it down.
Yeah, well, so let's reflect on that, right? Because you're not the first person that's told me that, and like it's the reason why some people will get sick of hearing it from me, because I repeat it almost every time that I'm asked to talk about the subject, because it also has to do with how we understand and mine the resource of the Quran in today's time in order to guide our social action in relevant ways that are rooted in our faith. The Quran was enough to fix a bunch of warring tribesmen and turn them into one people 1,400 years ago. It's enough to heal what we're facing if we would use it. If we would read it for this time, instead of just thinking of it as a text that lives between the covers of a book, like it's a thing that has to live within the breast of a human being, and God says, indeed, in this Quran there is healing and mercy for the believers. Healing and mercy is what we need to pull from that book. And in order to do so, we must read it to be healed from the ills of our time. Really important just piece to add to that. When you understand that this is a satanic attack, then you arm yourself differently against it. You don't think of it as a sociological problem that can be resolved strictly through material action in the social world.
It's deeper than that.
Exactly. The great West African Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba says that never forget the shaitan is only a dog set upon you by a master. When you get attacked by a dog, you don't yell at the dog, you call out for help from the master. You have to go with dhikr, you have to call upon God for aid, not in lieu of taking action, but as the thing that will orient your action. Spiritual protection, and fix the hearts of the children of Adam, because the hearts are the thing that's broken. The bad social structures are produced by corrupt hearts. If you transform the social structures, but you haven't transformed the hearts, then you're just going to end up with a different kind of corrupt social structure.
Okay, so you're calling for a whole different type of reform. It's a
Yeah,
very, this is not just, you know, a hashtag, tell your parents to stop being racist, have talks with your aunties. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is, I feel like I'm already sitting down. I need to get up and sit back down for a second. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this isn't
look,
just,
let's everybody just right now. Let's do what racist pigs denied our brother George Floyd. Let's just take a breath. And remember that that same breath that we just exhaled is the same breath that our noble creator breathed into the frame of Adam in order to animate him. We are all one people, and only a devil is going to ever tell you otherwise. Do you feel me?
yeah, yeah, I do. You know, I expected real emotional and intellectual stimulation from this talk, which I totally got, but I did not. You caught me off guard with the spiritual dynamics or dimensions of what racism means, the metaphysical meaning of racism. We see
Exactly.
its physical meaning, we see its physical representation. Okay? People killing people,
Yep.
right? Killing Black people. Let's be very specific here.
Let's be specific.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
be specific because we'll talk about that later, but let's be specific
Right.
about that.
Look,
But
let's
the
be real specific.
metaphysical
Like, guys,
ugliness,
this is
yes.
not about Palestine today. You know, this is not
Ah,
about, you know, like
yes.
this is about
It's not
Black
about
people being
Libya. It's not about.
tormented. You know, and it's not that we're ignoring other, you know, other causes. It's not that we're not protesting against Mexican kids being held in cages at the border. It's not that we're not protesting against oppression in Palestine, but it's that you have to understand the moment and the opportunity that we've been given is we've been given an opportunity to redress a historic wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to do it now. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, this is blessed. No, honestly, this is blessed. So what does that look like for us as a young Muslim community? You know, alhamdulillah, I've been fortunate enough to be able to organize Muslim-friendly retreats on the island. And really the goal of all my retreats is to not just provide my guests with an incredible experience, but to also support locally owned businesses. And to be very specific, it is not white Jamaican businesses that we support. It is Black owned Jamaican businesses. Because by way of slavery and what happened in Jamaica, white Jamaicans are good. The great majority of them are fine.
They
Okay.
chilling, yeah.
Some of my friends are not going to be happy for me to say that, but you know, I had to get it out there. So, you know what I'm saying? As Muslims, when we're coming into the islands and bringing our money and making sure our money goes into local pockets, how many more of these initiatives can we create that are, you know, even easier? It doesn't have to be a 1 week retreat where you maybe perhaps people can't afford the vacation sometimes. You know, what are we really looking at? People like myself, people like yourself, and other people of our generation. Yeah, how do we just see everything you just gave me, that feeling I have inside? How do I turn this into something tangible that I practice daily?
Yeah. So you asked the question about your own direct experience and the activities that you're most closely involved with, and that's the right approach, right? The thing that every single person that's listening, every single person that, you know, will hear this later needs to reflect on is, what action can I take in my immediate surroundings in order to promote an anti-racist agenda, and specifically an agenda that seeks to redress the historical brutalization and marginalization of Black people in this place. And by this place, it's not just the United States of America, it's also Jamaica, it's also the French Antilles, it's also Brazil. Wherever your place is, Black people are getting abused.
Yeah.
Wherever your
Yeah.
place is, Black people are being, you know, are living with legacies of white supremacist brutality, whether imperial or enslaved, or both. So it begins with changing the condition in your heart, and practicing self-reproach with respect to the problem of anti-Black thought and practice. There's a fine line, because Self-reproach is one of the beautiful characteristics of the spiritual people in this tradition. People see self-reproach, see any good deed that they've accomplished as small, and see any sin that they have committed as large. That's good.
That's a healthy way to
But
be.
exactly, self-doubt, on the other hand, is always a trick from the shaitan. Because it's not in the fitra, it's not in the innate disposition of a human being to doubt our capacities. When God breathes that breath into the frame of Adam, the first thing that Adam does before the breath even reaches his lower half, as soon as it reaches his navel, he tries to pop up. I'm ready. I'm ready to take action. And God says, indeed, mankind is made of haste. Right? Man, you don't even have life in your legs yet, and you're trying to stand up. The covenant that was offered to Adam was offered to everything else in creation, and nothing else wanted it. Nothing else wanted the burden of potentially being judged and thrown into the fire for its mismanagement of being a Khalifa over the created universe. So it's not in our nature to doubt our capacities. It's in our nature to say, I can do this if I call on my Lord. The self-doubt, when self-reproach shades into self-doubt, is when you fall for the shaitan's trick. The problem is too big. How can I actually have affect an outcome against this infernal machine which has been operating for 500 years? And it leads you to inaction, because the shaitan's game is despair. His game is despair. He knows what we're capable of if we stand arm in arm with one another. And that's why he's always trying to sow division. He knows what we're capable of if we actually become our true selves, return to our true selves, return to our fitra, and go out and love one another, care for one another, the way that God loves and cares for us, the way that we were meant to. So he's trying to convince us not to do that, and we cannot fall for any of the tricks. We can't fall for the self-hatred. We can't fall for the self-doubt. We have to take whatever concrete action we can in our own lives, and it might appear small, but if everybody does those things, it's going to make vast differences. And for those of us that are in positions of leadership and have an actual opportunity to actively promote an anti-racist agenda in institutions, then we have an obligation in this place to put Black voices at the forefront of that. Let the people who have suffered this historical injustice in this place actually speak for themselves, instead of always trying to speak for them and silencing them. Like I said the other night, like the non-Black Muslims in this moment definitely needs to stand up for my people, because if you don't stand up now with my people, then you're going to be counted amongst the people of Pharaoh, and the flood's going to wash you away too. But as you're standing up, take a step back.
I was just thinking, stand up and just take a few steps back.
Stand up and take a step back. Put forth the voices in this community, because African Americans are still the largest single contingent in the American Muslim community. And it was our enslaved ancestors that brought Islam to these lands before there was a United States of America.
Right. Yeah. SubhanAllah. Before the immigrant community came, before all of that. Yet there's
before pilgrims came to Jamestown, before Plymouth Rock landed on the Indians, right? There were enslaved West African Muslims in what's now Mexico City. We were here, man. And I often say that it is only the prayers of those enslaved African Muslims who prayed as the people of old prayed in the Quran, "Oh Lord, bring forth from my progeny a righteous people," that it's only that continuous prayer by enslaved African Muslims back in the day. That's the only reason why we've been spared as much time as we've been given. Because God would have called it a wrap for America long before now if it hadn't been for that.
It's the dua. So you're really calling for a reform of the heart, not just a little make some dhikr, do some dhikr, like understand the metaphysics of your heart, understand the physical reality of your heart, really just dig deep into,
and then stand up and take action. because the great West African scholar Sheikh Ibrahim Yas said, and I mentioned this the other night, so forgive the repetition, but he said the difference between hope and false hope is that hope is accompanied by deeds. Hope is accompanied by action. You don't just sit around waiting for God to
Yes.
fix it.
Right.
If you hope in God's aid, if you hope in God's mercy, then you are going to do your part. You're going to stand up and take action. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you see an injustice, stop it with your hand. If you can't stop it with your hand, speak against it with your tongue. And if you fear for your life and speaking against it with your tongue, then at least turn your heart against it. And that is the least that can be accepted of a personal belief. We have an opportunity with our hand to hold up a sign. We have an opportunity with our hand to decide where we're going to spend our money. We have an opportunity with our voice to speak against white supremacy. Nobody is in a position right now where they just have to turn their heart against it, but they have to start by turning their heart against it. And they have to start by turning their heart against their own nafs, against their own ego, against their own lower soul. They have to let that tender, soft, supple organ inside the body be the critic of the ego, and actually say to the ego, you're not in charge anymore. I know that I've been guilty, and I'm turning my heart over to the one who made it. And now that I'm returning back to my true self, I know how connected I am with the rest of humanity, and I'm going to stand up with him, and I'm not going to let him suffer. I'm not going to let one more person die in vain.
You know, I got to tell you, that's the most practical piece of advice I got when it comes to truly eradicating racism. You know, I came across this quote many years ago, and it was by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and he said something along the lines of, if you
People,
want to...
the English speakers don't know who that is, but he was,
Antoine de
wonderful.
Saint-Exupéry, I always have to butcher the French name,
No,
but
no, you're good.
he wrote The Little Prince, if you guys are familiar with the book, and essentially he had a quote where he said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to go and collect wood. Don't beat people up to force them into labor. Instead, what you should do is instill within them the love of the ocean. And when you instill within people the love of the ocean, they are going to want to build many, many ships and sail on wonderful journeys. And I think the idea that I'm getting from what you're saying is to instill that love of the ocean within yourself and others. And that way you can really build something long lasting, and you'll know it's genuine. It won't just be a hashtag. It won't be a profile photo that you're changing for a day. Not to say that that doesn't matter, but what you're talking about is far more important, in my opinion. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but it's not sufficient. I don't think it's
not
sufficient.
sufficient.
Wow. SubhanAllah. So what do we go forward? What do we go forward in terms of physically, right? Does that look like an institution? Does that look like... You know, we have Zaytuna College, which is it's a wonderful place, alhamdulillah. I'm really grateful to Sheikh Hamza and Imam Zaid and all the people that have founded it. Are we thinking of something like this? Can we build something like this from the Black Muslim community? Do we need something like this? Where would our money be most, where would our money benefit the most?
I think that the institutions that exist, that are doing the educational work, that are doing the sociological work, institutions like Iman in Chicago and in Atlanta, Beacon Foundation and others in Michigan, Hub Foundation and the Bay Area. There's all kinds of different people that are doing, really important work. I think that one of the problems, I'll just put this the way that my dad, who had a 6th grade education, would have put it. One of the problems that we got in the American Muslim community is we got too many chiefs, not enough Indians. We don't have to create a new institution that we can be the boss of in order to actually affect change in things. We have people that have built institutions that are doing good work. We just have to figure out how we can support one another in mutual solidarity and actually infuse this this haqiqah, this spiritual reality into those efforts. Because, and I said this the other night, I'll say this in a slightly different way now, that the organizing tradition as it has been appropriated from the American Civil Rights Movement by lots of different kinds of groups, is now a thoroughly co-opted and bourgeois tool that corporate capitalism has many, many ways of manipulating, okay?
Absolutely.
We are going to have to develop a new language and a new modality of protest. That is much less about institutions than it is about an orientation towards the new crisis. We can't put, you know, old wine in new bottles. We actually have to be bold enough and audacious enough to develop new collective responses to the crises of our age. And that requires, that's the real reason for focusing on the spiritual intervention, because it's going to take illuminated hearts, people that have basira, inner sight, rather than just sociological acumen, in order to find the right prescriptions for this time. The concrete steps that can be taken in the meantime is to double down on your dhikr. If you don't have a spiritual guide, find your spiritual guide so that you can start to work on yourself. Because if you're not safe from your own nafs, how can you help anybody else? Number one. If most of your time is spent gratifying your appetites because you have not yet engaged in the jihad against those appetites, then most of your energy will be expended in things that don't promote the cause of humanity in any way.
Of course.
So this is an academic point, but I just want to make it because it is a way that I can say something different than what I said the other night. People often refer to the amazing text, the Ihya Ulumuddin of Ghazali.
Yeah.
You know, the revival of the sciences of religion, you know, 40 volumes, extraordinary work. And people think that it's about making Muslims into better Muslims. Because what he talks about is how you pair the struggle against the lower soul with the analytical knowledge of Islam, the things that help us become good Muslims and understand, you know, God better. The topic that we started with. But the truth is that what Ghazali's motivation there is not to make people into better Muslims. He himself was made into a better Muslim by submitting himself to a sheikh, to a spiritual mentor, to a guide. What he's trying to do is, because he's an academic and a scholar, he's trying to produce better academics and scholars. He's trying to take what he has learned about the jihad and nafs and apply it to the task that he's in.
Yeah.
So that people will become better scholars because they're freed from the chattering of their nafs. And then their hearts and their intellects will actually be able to do the work that they were gifted to do. And that doesn't just go for people who are scholars, that goes for people who are artists, that goes for people who are craftsmen, that goes for people who are protesters, for tradesmen. You will become a more effective instrument for whatever you do once you have been set free from the prison of your own ego, from the prison of your own lower soul.
SubhanAllah, thank you so much. That was really, really powerful, honestly. And I think we have a lot of people on the live, and I could feel the energy. I could feel it's resonated with a lot of people. Let me open it up. Let me open up some
Probably,
comments.
I was gonna say, I probably should
okay.
take questions, because in principle, I'm supposed to actually have Zoom office hours for my UCSB students at 3.
Okay, and that's
So,
in 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, inshallah. I mean,
Okay,
I can be late to my own office hours, but I don't want to be too late to my own office
Yeah, no,
hours.
I understand. So you know what? We can open up the questions for another few minutes. You guys feel free to share comments and questions, inshallah, and then we'll read them, and then Brother Bilal can just discuss them. I'm really blown away. I'm just gonna read a few things for you, and you could pick whichever ones you want to talk about. Here we have. Can we discuss racism in East Africans? Define the lower soul, if you can. Great talk yesterday. Thank you so much. Yeah, for anyone asking, this is going to be saved. It's going to stay on my timeline. It will stay repeatedly. Someone did ask about repeating the quote from Sheikh Ibrahim.
Sure.
So yeah, here we go.
Yeah, I'm seeing them as well. So
Cool.
the racism in East Africa. So just to clarify, if you're the one that asked the question, are you talking specifically about kind of the Somali community vis-a-vis African Americans? I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Let's see what they say.
Yeah, I'll wait them out.
Yeah, those are really powerful. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of book recommendations.
Maybe
Yeah.
it might take too long for the answer to come back. So I'll answer as though that's the nature of the question.
Yeah.
Because there have been public.
She said, "I'm Somali. I'm asking."
Yeah, exactly. So the way that I would frame it is this. That there has certainly been recent, kind of public, via social media and other means, like dismissal of African Americans by, prominent, well-placed Somali intellectuals, East African intellectuals. And that's unfortunate. And we should condemn self-hate in every form, right? But there's more to it than just condemning Somalis who have been brainwashed into, participating in the marginalization of African Americans. We also need to remind people that, especially in a place like Minneapolis, where, where I in part grew up, the discrimination in the African American community against Somalis is also bitter. There's a relationship, a strained relationship between Africans and African Americans of all kinds in every community. And this is, a problem that we don't often talk about, kind of outside of the community. We don't air our dirty laundry, in public. But as an African American who went to West Africa, I encountered these stereotypes. I encountered stereotypes about Africans from within my own family. People, in my own family said, "Do they live in trees over there?"
Yeah.
Right? Because they're thinking about Tarzan movies. And when I get to Senegal, people are saying, "Is it true that y'all are just shooting each other up, out in the middle of the streets every night?" And then I ask myself a question: well, what's the common denominator in the way that Africans perceive African Americans and African Americans perceive Africans? And that's when I understood the problem, is that both of them are getting their images from a white controlled media. we have a set of stereotypes that are designed, and then that's when so this is just that other problem that I just identified. This is just the devil trying to divide the children of Adam. So whether it's African American discrimination against Somalis, whether it's East African denunciation of African Americans, it's all the same satanic religion. It's the same reason why I didn't directly answer your question about whether there's a difference between Arab and Desi versions of anti-Blackness, because we're all just talking about, subtle distinctions in one infernal ideology.
It stems from the same problem. It stems from the same imposter.
Exactly, from the same imposter. So rather than treating each individual manifestation of the illness, why not just eradicate its root cause?
Exactly.
Then
we're getting
all
so
of the
caught up with the tree, we
wither.
can't see the forest. Back to the branches and the trees, but
Exactly,
really,
exactly.
we're getting so caught up with the tree, we can't see the forest, and we're focused on this one tree and not realizing there's a bigger problem.
Exactly. Somebody had the post. They've seen it. It's not white versus black.
It's racist versus.
It's racist versus everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I've responded in DMs to people as I said, and shaitan versus humanity.
Yeah, precisely.
That's the real reason why it's the racist versus everybody, because it's really just shaitan versus humanity.
And I feel like it's just tumbling down. Everything is moving so much faster. It seems there's desires and wicked things within us that are awakened that we didn't even know we had. I feel like that's the times that we're living in right now. It's like, whoa, I didn't even know I had that desire before.
The spiritual specialists will tell you that as we get closer and closer to the end of days, people start obeying the logic of their final destination more and more obviously. The people of the light are increasingly drawn to the light, and the people of the darkness are increasingly drawn to the darkness, because the afterlife. So everything in this is a great teaching from the great Senegambian Sheikh Imam Fode Drame. He said everything in this life is a mixture of light and darkness. Even the most intense pleasure comes with a measure of pain, and even the experience of pain, just by the fact of experiencing it, there's a portion of pleasure in it. Everything's mixed. but the afterlife is pure reward and pure punishment. Those things that are together get extracted from one another. And as we get closer and closer to the end, that process, we start to feel it actually here in this dunya.
Yeah.
And everything is speeding up, and
Yeah, and there's no
people,
lines between right and wrong anymore. It's, I feel like as I look around, everything is whatever you feel is right. Just do it. You can't even really have a logical argument with someone as to why lying is wrong. Because you'll just hear, well, I just had to lie because it made me feel good. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's just really,
yeah,
really scary because there's no, I don't know. I'm feeling very, I feel very nervous, but I also feel very calm. I feel like there's an opening coming. And
there
alhamdulillah, we
is.
have Islam. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And, you know, I just had a random thought as you were speaking right now. I
please.
think what you're doing, enlightening people about the scholarship in West Africa, and even, bringing people there. I know Mustafa Briggs is having a retreat in Senegal, and I think even
Yeah,
bringing people.
I had planned to take a group actually in April, and then COVID canceled that. But
Okay,
inshallah,
so do you have
we'll
any
do it
plans of
again.
doing things like that, of
Yes,
taking people
yeah,
to
we'll
West Africa?
absolutely,
And
inshallah, as soon as it's safe again, we'll definitely do it.
because I think another thing, one of the best ways to transform hearts is to take a journey. And what better
Yeah,
way to
for
take a
sure.
journey than to go to Senegal and Gambia and see the people, you know?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. So I want to say one other thing, just because it's on my mind, and I was wondering how to say it, but the opportunity presented itself, so I'm just going to say it. So the talk that I gave the other night was on the way of Iblis. It was about white supremacy and its connection with capitalism, which we didn't talk about today, but we can talk about inshallah another time. But what we really need to have a conversation about, frankly, is the way of the Dajjal.
Yeah.
The way of the Antichrist, because the circumstances that accelerate the end of time um, favor the appearance of this figure. And the Prophet ﷺ spoke a lot about the Dajjal at the end of his life, and not much, in the record before that. And one of his companions said, you've told us for a long time about the Shaitan, and we feel like we're, armed against him. But you've been talking a lot about the Dajjal recently, to the point that we're fearful. And he
Yeah, what's
said,
the dua against this one,
exactly,
What's the
exactly. And
protocol?
he ﷺ said, don't worry. He said, if he comes while I'm here, I'll take care of him. And if he comes after I'm gone, I've left you with what you need to take care of him. But what's interesting is that the Quran repeatedly describes the shaitan as da'if, as weak. Okay? Because he can only fight you with weapons that you give him.
Mm.
The Dajjal is never described as weak in the Prophet's hadiths about him. He is described as the greatest fitna.
Yeah.
The greatest fitna. And the heart of the Dajjal is described as being one of those hearts that's inverted. There's a hadith where the Prophet describes 4 kinds of hearts: one sound, one that is closed, one that is bifurcated, it's split, and then another one that's inverted, it's upside down.
Oh man, that doesn't sound good,
And
that
when
last one there.
that doesn't sound good, that last one,
Mm-hmm.
the Dajjal is that kind of heart. So that the world has to be upside down for the appearance of a false Messiah to look like a real Messiah. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a world that is being turned upside down and
Okay,
shaken
it's all
and shaken.
something. A lot of the Jal talks I've watched were like from 10, 15 years ago, or Sheikh Hamza was all about it. But I feel like we need new Dajjal talks, because the signs have kind of like from 15 years ago to today, we're getting closer. Do you know what I'm saying? And I feel we need more, just new tools as to how to deal with this thing, because we are what you're saying. Like, this is upside down.
Yeah, we're in the upside down for those Stranger Things fans, out there. We're in the. I don't know if anybody got the Netflix reference, but we're increasingly living in an upside down world, and so we need to actually take specific actions, because the game plan of the Shaitan and the game plan of the Dajjal are not identical. The Shaitan knows what his end is, and so he's trying to prolong the time so he can lead as many of the children of Adam astray as possible. The Dajjal thinks he's actually going to win his war against God. And so he is an instrument of chaos, not just about leading people astray, and fighting against what is becoming increasingly chaotic and
Sorry, I'm
upside
sorry to
down.
interrupt. It's telling us there's 26 seconds remaining. I'm assuming it's because it hits an
Oh, do we
hour
have a
mark.
timer? Okay.
Oh, well, I don't have a timer. It has its own timer. So okay, I know you have your office hours, and
Yep.
should I pop back out and pop back in, or
Sure, we can pop out and pop back in.
yeah,
Let's
it
try
feels
that.
weird to just like say bye like this. This isn't right. I'm just gonna let
Okay.
the 7
Sure.
seconds die out, and then